if I'm having to think about like these kinds of motions, it's not just like, oh, I'm doing this, but it's starting to really pull from back here. And what does that sensation then mean if I have to find, I don't know, choreography, etc. So instead of just like this happening, it's then all of like that being able to move up and through. So yeah, thoughts, comments, concerns, how are we feeling? Yeah, are we like connecting some ideas here? Cool, very nice. So those are a few ones thinking about kind of shoulder placement and position, and then also thinking about what we call open chain movement. So arm moving on torso. Now, if we have torso moving on arm, that's an entirely different situation. So let's talk about that. So in the same way that we were talking about our shoulders going like up, like elevating, depressing, protracting, retracting, let's do the same thing, except now instead of our shoulder blades moving this way, it is going to be our rib cage moving on our shoulder blades. So the example I like to give here is if I'm on my hands this way, am I letting my rib cage just hang on my shoulder blades, or can I be nice and supported up this way? And this is where we get into our protraction situation. So I would like us to, let's do the same thing here with like elevate, depress, protract, retract, except we're going to move into more of a rotational situation. So here, for example, let's just go retract. So that means pulling our shoulder blades together. So you're almost like sinking down a little bit. Woo! Yes. And if I protract, I push and lift my rib cage away. Yes. And if I elevate my shoulder blades, yes, and then depress my shoulder blades. Good. One more time. And retract. So yes. And then protract. Push it away. Yes. Elevate your shoulders, so ear to shoulders or shoulders to ear, and then depress it. Bring it all the way down. Good. Very nice. And relax. So the demand becomes a little different, right? And I think especially with floor work and things like that, definitely something to think about with like impact and floor transitions, all the fun things we see on social media. So for our purposes, this is one way that I like to cue for at least our hands being on the ground. And it goes back to that idea of internal rotation and like internally rotating and externally rotating. So even here, just in a, let's just go into quadruped position. So I'm thinking about trying to almost like turn my hands in. So if I try to turn my hands in, what are some things that we begin to feel? I feel like it just wants to like do this, right? So when I like to cue for especially shoulder exercises on the ground, I like to think about what it feels like to rotate. And I'm not necessarily pressing my shoulders down, but it's this nice downward rotation, and I'm continuing to lift the rib cage away from the floor. Yes. Yeah. And so this is always a fun position to breathe in as well, because now you're looking at how do I support myself with my shoulders so then I can expand in my ribs without like holding everything tight. So if you would like, you can come into the bear position. Let's think about the palms, trying to rotate the floor away, and you should feel some muscles underneath your shoulder blade engage. And then from here, just take 2 breaths. Breathing in. Can you breathe into the center of your rib cage and out? Woo! In. Good. And out. Very nice. Solid. And relax. Good. How are we doing? Yes. So it should feel like effort, 1. And then 2, it's that giving that awareness of like, oh, am I falling into here when I try to breathe, or can I maintain that nice in between for where my muscles are? When we talk about, are we all familiar with once again, the serratus anterior muscle? So this is the one that kind of lifts our shoulder up. Sometimes it's hard to kind of feel where it is in space, and especially with some of our dancers who have a lot of motion, it's kind of hard to like where is it happening, because they don't feel if the shoulder blades are kind of moving. So being able to connect to the ground and to give a different sense of effort, I think, has been very helpful. So for our purposes, similar to a downward dog, but this is where we talk about our sort of like plank exercise and like walking back. But what I'd like for us to experiment around is what the difference is between here and going into a downward dog versus if I'm here and then I keep my knees, once again, floating, and I'm just going to float backwards this way before going to a downward dog. So now my effort has to be in this line of pull. I can't really relax into it. Yes. So how do we keep that effort? And then when we come back, same thing, instead of being here, how do I continue to push the floor away? Almost like I'm vaulting myself up and over. Let me try that. Yes, here we go. So on our hands and feet, yes, hands and feet. So same thing, find that rotation, and you should feel underneath the shoulder blades engage a little bit. And yes, if you need to be on your knees, it's totally fine. And then as I push away, I'm gonna float my knees where they are. How we doing? Yes, yeah, so really kind of extend all the way. And then as I come back, I'm gonna continue to push the floor away without shrugging in my shoulders. Good, here you go. Inhale, exhale. Very nice, good. And then forward. Hold, 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 hold. Yes. Woo! How we doing? And it's like one of those things where you're not forcing the mobility, but you're allowing it to move with like a sense of effort, right? So with that said, one of my favorite exercises for this is like a backwards, it's a backwards push, because now I have to exert that energy to propel myself. But then if you're walking backwards too, it's the same thing where you have to hold. You have to hold. Yes. And then you know it's not me. You knew this was coming. Being able to balance a block on your back, and that way it helps us be mindful of what's happening in our spine and in our pelvis as well. How's your back feeling? I feel like this is helping. Good. Yes. A little bit of motion and mobility. If we were to talk about the idea of like stability and how we support ourselves, there's a huge rotational component to it. So it's nice to sort of feel like where the effort is, and especially even with something like this. I know we're talking about a shoulder exercise, but never anything in isolation.